Okay, everybody, thanks for joining today. So we're going to take another look at a document-based question as we're kind of reviewing through the American history for the exam. So here's what we need to discuss today. First of all, we're going to be looking at the time period. I'm going to share my screen with you. We're going to be looking at the time period 1825 to 1850. So do remember that, as we've talked about in the past, they're going to give you a block of time, usually at least 25 years, sometimes 50 years, and they're going to give you a topic, and you're going to be able to use the evidence, but also you need to really think about what were the big themes that were happening at that time, okay? So let's read this. I'm going to read this out loud because I know some of you guys on your phones, harder to see the screen here. So the document-based question we're going to cover today is: reform movements in the United States sought to expand democratic ideals. Assess the validity of this statement with specific reference to the years 1825 to 1850. Okay, so reform movements in the U.S. sought to expand democratic ideals. Now, the first thing I want to point out is when they say assess the validity, what are they telling you to do? It's another way of saying, do you agree or disagree with the statement, right? So what I would do is, again, we're going to create a thesis statement after we look at these documents. That's going to be your first paragraph. Then I would have a paragraph that would say which of these documents actually support the statement, right? That agree that it expanded democratic ideals. Then have a paragraph that disagrees with it, okay? And then ultimately, if you want to do a third body paragraph, you can. Or if you don't, I mean, you can do a 4-paragraph essay and that's fine as well, but just set it up that way. 1 paragraph showing the documents that support it, 1 paragraph telling the documents that are against it, and then wrap it all up. Okay, so as we're reading through these, I want you to think, does this document support that statement or disagree with that statement? And also just think democratic ideals. When we say democratic, what do we mean by that? We're really kind of talking about like the will of the people, right? So do these support our democratic values, meaning rights to all people? Probably when we talk about rights, we're probably talking about voting. We're probably talking about access, right? So are those type of things included here? So I want you thinking about that here as I begin to go through these one by one. Does this document support that statement, or is it in conjunction with it? Okay, so here we go. Source number 1, this is the 4th annual report, Society for the Reformation of Juvenile Delinquents in the City of New York, 1829. We might feel a pride in the reflection that our young country was the first to adopt the penitentiary system of prison discipline and the first to attempt to prevent the commission of crimes by seeking out the youthful and unprotected who were in the way of temptation, and by religious and moral instruction, by imparting to them useful knowledge, and by giving them industrious and orderly habits, rescuing them from vice, and rendering them valuable members of society. To refine these youthful criminals, where no or scarcely any distinction can be made between the young and the old, or between the more and less vicious, where little can be learned but the ways of the wicked, and from whence they must be sent to encounter new wants, new temptations, and to commit new crimes, is to pursue a course as little reconcilable with justice as humanity. Yet the house of refuge was established. There was no alternative. So notice the title. It kind of gives away what they're going to argue, right? They are the Society for the Reformation of Juvenile Delinquents. So if you guys remember when we're talking about crime in the early 1800s, part of the issue is, by the way, we're dealing with this right now, right? If you guys are watching the news, we're talking about criminal justice reform. Why? Because a lot of times you throw away criminals and you give them these like long sentences, but they might have done one small crime. Do you really want to lock them up for 30 years? Do you really want to lock them up for 20 years? But they don't give them a way out a lot of times. And so you hear that a lot today. Should we give criminals a second chance? Or, should we give lesser punishments? Well, back then, it was exponentially worse, right? And they would even do this with really young people. So that's what they're talking about is, look, we're throwing really young people who make one bad decision in jail or prison for long periods of time. And then notice kind of at the end, it says, we don't even attempt to reconcile them. Okay, we're not even trying to help them get back. So what they want is a new type of justice system, one that allows people the ability there to improve themselves and be back part of society. So document A, would we say it agrees or disagrees with the statement there that reform movement sought to expand democratic ideals? What do we think? Agree or disagree?
Could you say the question again?
So are they arguing to expand democratic ideals or not with this first document?
To expand.
Exactly, to expand, right? And specifically, if I asked you who are they looking to expand to? Young people. Where most likely, what kind of people you think they're talking about, like in what type of environment? It doesn't come right out and tell you, but what do you remember about crime? What?
Or environments.
Yeah, exactly. So remember, there's a really easy explanation for why. So this is big cities. Like big cities, there's a lot of young people in prisons and jail. By the way, there's one really like easy explanation of why there's a lot more like people in jail in big cities. Because there's big cities, right? There's a lot more people there, right? So one of the problems is if you just lock people up for one crime for a long amount of time in a big city where there's 1 million people living there, you're gonna have all these people in jail and you're gonna have no ability to get them out, and you're gonna run out of room, and it's gonna become this really terrible environment. Because also remember, how good is living conditions in those prisons gonna be if you're imprisoning that many people? So now let's take a look. So document A, yes, I agree with Xavier. That would be, that supports the statement. So let's take a look here at document B. Charles Finney, 1834. When the churches are awakened and reformed, the reformation and salvation of sinners will follow, going through the same stages of conviction, repentance, and reformation. Their hearts will be broken down and changed. Very often the most abandoned profligates are among the subjects, harlots, drunkards, and infidels, and all sorts of abandoned characters are awakened and converted. Now, one of the things we have to remember here is this is the Second Great Awakening. Okay, the First Great Awakening was earlier in period 1. We're talking the 1600s, where we have all of these pastors that try to change the way church looks. In the early 1800s, we had the Second Great Awakening, and Charles Finney was a pastor back then. And what he's arguing here is we have got to be aggressively seeking out the people who society turns their back on. We need to be bringing these people into church. And by the way, there's a lot of resistance in the church. The church, go, oh, well, that person did this or that person did that. And so what this group of reformers wanted to do was say, hey, look, they're people too. As a matter of fact, those are exactly the people we should be bringing to church. So, and then notice, it's a really great line here about their hearts will be broken down and changed. And they really start talking about this more and more in the church, which is, you mean tell you, like, a lot of times people that have done things that, that could be really, really bad are people that really want to change. They want somebody to help them do that. They don't like the way their life has been going. So again, you can actually change these people a lot of times easier than other people to convert to Christianity. So that's the message he's making here. Now, this might be a little tougher, right? Because if we go back to our statement, expand democratic ideals, okay? So he's not as much talking about government. He's talking about the church. But what he's arguing with the church is that you should bring these other groups of people in, okay? So that argument, I would again say it agrees with that initial statement. Okay, so we have 2 now that support. All right, let's now keep going. Document B. Document C, sorry. We got a picture here. So This one again is, notice they're not going to come around and tell you this, but I hope you guys can draw this connection. So you got this engraving in 1835, and it says, am I not a woman and a sister? So what do you think they are? What's the reference here? This isn't just a, this is meant to be referencing some other point in history as well. Where else have you seen an image similar to this? Do you remember another image that looked very similar? It was actually a painting. Do you remember, guys? It was an older painting. It was in the early 1800s, but it was a slave, and he had his arms like that, and he's really bent over, and you can see all the lashes on his back. Looks exact same stance, and he says, "Am I not a man and a brother?" So the reference here is, okay, we are talking about slavery. Okay, we've talked about abolishing slavery, but why are we not using the same logic towards women? I mean, right? I mean, if we're talking that African American men should be freed and should have these rights, shouldn't, number one, African American women get the same treatment, but then all women get the same treatment as well? So they're playing off of, in the 1830s, you're beginning to have that abolitionist movement really start. So they're really trying to reference that as, look, use the same logic to women as you use with men. So again, we have another one that supports, but I want you to notice something. The first document dealt with, I'm going to make the mention here that it's young criminals. The second one is talking about, probably criminals as well, and not necessarily criminals, I guess it says drunkards, but people down on their luck that they want to get to church. This one is talking about women, and they show them in chains. So first of all, slavery, absolutely. But the fact that they chose to show a woman and not a man like the other painting shows that they might even be talking about beyond that they're enslaved, but also that they're women that are enslaved. So there's kind of that extra issue there that's going on. Okay, so you have that in there as well. So let's move down. I want to jump on to, there's another visual that I wanted to show you guys right now, because there's a lot going on in this one. Okay, so this is called, it says The Drunkard's Progress. Let me find the top here. From the First Glass to the Grave, 1846. So here you go. I'm going to read, again, this is really small, so to make sure that you guys can see this here, it says, a glass with a friend, step 1. Step 2, a glass to keep the cold out. Step 3, a glass too much. Step 4, drunk and riotous. Step 5, the summit attained, jolly companions and confirmed drunkard. Step 6, poverty and disease. Step 7, forsaken by friends. Step 8, desperation and crime. Step 9, death and suicide. Okay, and then underneath in the bottom, you've got a woman. I mean, she's a young mother. It looks like, got her kid there, and she's crying. Okay, so let's break. There's just a lot going on here. I wanted to make sure that we had time to get to this before we start talking about putting this all together. So, what do you see? What are they? What's the purpose of this document? What do you think, Xavier? What do you think they're trying to, like, by showing each step and then showing the grieving mother there? What's the message here?
I guess.
Yeah, I mean, notice the middle. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know.
Okay, let's walk through it though. Just look at the images too, because now that's the other thing, guys. Make sure you read all the comments on the cartoon, but also notice, like, at first it's really relaxed, right? Kind of in here. Then you see there starts to be a struggle. Okay, so they're kind of showing you what they think are the steps of, like, someone that's a drunk. Like, what happens? Like, hey, it all starts off all fun and games. Then you might get in a fight or something, but then, you know what, there are people that are always going to be like, it's okay, just keep drinking, whatever, we're having a good time. And then notice the downward decline, okay? Poverty and disease, your friends will turn on you, crime, death, and suicide. So, now, by the way, it's pretty dramatic, right? I mean, it's definitely a dramatic cartoon, but it's meant to really get people's attention. That look what alcohol is causing. They're trying to make the direct connection between just a few drinks could turn into a life of crime. It could turn into your death. It could ruin your friendships, cause diseases. So one of the things that they're promoting here is prohibition, to make the manufacture and sale of alcohol illegal. Okay, so that being said, is this supporting democratic ideals to maximize kind of freedoms in society? No, I would say H opposes that. They're making the argument that this is why we should stop people from doing this. Now, whether you agree with that or not, they're definitely going against the tide of kind of like freedom to do these certain things, right? Ultimately, what they're hoping for is an amendment to the Constitution, which is going to get passed, okay? But it's going to take several decades after that point. So I wanted to show you that and to show you a negative one, and there's one other one that I wanted to show you as well. Not that one. Let's get back up here. Yeah. This is from Samuel Morse, The Imminent Dangers to the Free Institutions of the United States. In our national infancy, we needed to strengthen of our numbers. Now immigration has changed. Naturalization has become the door of entrance, not alone to the ever welcome lovers of liberty, but also for the priest-ridden troops of the Holy Alliance. Now immigrants are selected not for their affinity to liberty, but for their mental servitude and their docility in obeying the order of the priests. It may be, Americans, that you still doubt the existence of a conspiracy. Do you wish to test its existence and its power? Test it by attempting to change in the naturalization law. Take the ground that such a change must be made, that no foreigner who comes into the country after the law is passed shall ever be allowed the right of suffrage. Now, I just want to emphasize that last line, that no foreigner who comes into the country after the law is passed shall ever be allowed the right of suffrage. By suffrage, we mean the right to vote. So is this person wanting to expand democracy? They're not. Notice this at the beginning too. They're changing. It's not lovers of liberty that are coming in. It's people that don't love liberty, and so we shouldn't allow those people to vote. And by the way, that's kind of an interesting argument to make, right? Like, this group of people, I don't think they love liberty, so I'm going to kind of take some liberties from them. That's pretty interesting, right? But in 1835, the group that people they're talking about is like Eastern Europeans. They don't want the Eastern Europeans to come in, influence the elections. It was viewed back then that your Eastern Europeans, the Russian descent especially, were going to vote for, like an authoritarian government because that was kind of the government they had overseas. So there's kind of like, some of that going on. You also have the Italians and some other groups that they just don't trust. And so you have this movement here amongst some in the United States. They're saying, look, I don't know if these people should be allowed to vote, which again is just fascinating that, you're saying that you're for liberty and they're not, so I'm going to take their rights away. Anyway, we won't get into that. But another example of a statement that would oppose the growth of democratic values. Now what I'm going to do is I want to pull up a little whiteboard here. So I want you guys to remember this. I want you to really make sure that as we're talking about writing an essay here, for an AP exam, but guys, I've talked to you about this with history, but also with English, that I want you to use and think about making a thesis formula so that you're making an argument right from the beginning, okay? And remember the formula that we've talked about before. Okay, guys, I know it's been a couple of days since you've seen this. But Jalen, Shayla, I sure hope you remember this little formula here. Okay, remember X, however, A, B, therefore Y. Okay, so remember when we're looking at this, X is one of the arguments we're going to make. A and B are the other two arguments that we're going to discuss. Therefore, Y is a restatement of the prompt itself. Okay, so when I pull this back up and we look at, I'm going to put the statement here at the top. Wow. So the statement is, reform movements in the U.S. sought to expand democratic ideals. Get this text box back up. Okay. So, and what we went through, I went through 5 with you guys. And remember, for the AP exam, that's what they're going to give you. They're cutting it down from 11 to 5. So we have them categorized. We have 3 that support, and we have 2 that disagree. So what we're going to do is, since we've got more that actually support it, we're going to start with X being the supporting statements. Okay. So remember, we have a supporting statement that says that they want to expand rights and privileges to people in prison. Okay. And they want to also expand they want to expand the amount of people going to what? What else are they trying to draw people towards? Who was Father Finney? He's a preacher. So what was he after? What was his concern? It wasn't really the political rights. It wasn't really that kind of argument. It was a religious argument. So what are you wanting? What is a preacher probably wanting when he's saying we need to go out and talk to people that don't go to church? Obviously, what's he wanting?
Spreading the gospel.
Spreading the gospel, right? And to spread the gospel, he wants them in church, wants them to be baptized. Again, that's not a political argument. That's just a religious, like, hey, I want you here. I want you coming to my church. So he's arguing that they be involved. So just watch me go through this, because again, I'm kind of walking you guys through this. And what I want you to do before our next meeting is I want you to type up the thesis statement. I want you to bring it. Okay. So I'm going to walk through this one again today, but then I want you guys working on creating these. So then when we come together and meet, I can just go over that one with you. Okay. So I'm going to do this one more time with you guys today. So notice I got my formula up here at the top. And so here's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to say, during the early 1800s, the U.S. supported democratic values by pushing the, sorry, no spell check on this, by pushing the education of those in prison. Now, by the way, notice, I'm not giving a whole lot of detail there, right? I'm not explaining that they thought that people were way too like the incarceration rate was way too high in the cities, and that it was way too punitive, it was way too harsh on people. I'm not explaining that in my thesis. Remember, we'll explain that in the body paragraph. Right now, I'm just saying, hey, they want to educate those in prison. We'll explain details later. That's enough detail for this point. And bring people who were looked down upon to church. Again, we'll explain later, like the whole argument that I was just making there about, hey, we want them to be baptized, we want to bring them the gospel. We'll explain all that in the paragraph. I'm just saying they have been trying to bring those people that were looked down upon to church. However, there were also significant movements to take rights away from people in poverty and immigrants. Therefore, the largest movements in the U.S. during this time did support democratic values. Okay, there you go. That's our first paragraph, guys. Okay, so now, by the way, I think it's a good time to make note of this. Notice, usually there's nothing as like all of one thing or the other, right? Like if we're talking current events and you asked, 10 people how things were going in America right now, right? Probably, obviously it changes depending on what's going on, but you're always going to have some people like, hey, I think things are good. I like the president's doing blah, 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 blah. And you're going to have people go, I think it's terrible. I think the president's doing blah, 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 blah. Now, sometimes you might have, 8 people that think things are good. And sometimes you might have 3 people, but you're always going to have there's always probably one thing somebody's doing good and at least one thing someone's doing poorly. It is important that when you're writing an essay that you acknowledge the counter argument. Now, I'm saying this specifically for AP History and AP Government and AP Language and AP Literature and all your AP English classes too, because they actually award points for that because they think it shows depth to your argument, right? I'm not saying everybody valued democratic principles in the 1800s. Obviously, that's not true, right? We still have African Americans that are enslaved. We still have women that don't have rights. But remember, I'm talking about some specific movements. So I'm talking about the civil rights movement. Absolutely. They had democratic values. The women's rights movement, they had democratic values. But I'm also in my essay going to talk about, guess what? There were some that absolutely did not. There were groups that were anti-immigration, and there were groups that were supporting of slavery. So I'm going to talk about those in the body paragraphs. But again, notice that my argument's much more complex. That's something as we talk about kind of making a college level essay, you want to make sure that you show that complexity because, one of the things I always want you guys to, that's kind of a silly way of saying it, right? But you really want to be careful about making like a statement that is everything is this way or nothing was this way, right? Because it's very rare in life that everything falls into an easy category, okay? So you always want to be able to show the complexity of your argument for that. Okay, so before I go into how to use evidence, do I have any questions at this point? Do you guys, I'm kind of looking at you here, so you can kind of give me a nod or thumbs up, or if you want me to kind of slow down, shake your head or throw something at your computer there. But that's all you need for an opening paragraph. That's the whole opening paragraph. Okay. All right. Looks like you guys are with me, so I'm gonna keep going. So now, how do we use those documents we just looked at? So document A was talking about the prison. So I got you about a little under 10 minutes left. So I'm gonna show you at least one paragraph. So how do we use document A? Talked about prison reform. So here's what I'm going to say. I would literally write it this way. In document A, we are shown an argument that prisons are inappropriately treating young people. Let me scroll down here some. Sorry guys, let me do this one more time. Let me reshare this. Is it like all the screen I got? Okay. Here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna clear this. In document A, we are shown an example of Man, I cannot. I am struggling with that word. Inappropriately, maybe. They, Miss Hunt, you can spell check me there if I'm wrong. That doesn't look right, but they have harsh treatment on the prisoners and lock them up for long amounts of time for petty crimes. Okay. Now, what you notice what I did there, that's really like straightforward, is what the document said that they were doing these things. What you need to do next is you need to explain why that's not democratic. Okay? Why is that not democratic, right? Now, again, I know sometimes when I say this, you're probably going, well, it's pretty obvious. No. You need to say it, okay? You need to spell it out in your essay. So my next sentence is going to be my explanation, my analysis of why that's not a democratic value. And so why would that not be a democratic value, to treat prisoners bad and lock them up for long amounts of time when they haven't even done anything that's that bad? So like, they stole something that wasn't worth that much money, but you're going to do this to them. That's not a democratic value. Why? Can you give me a specific reason why that wouldn't be a democratic value? I want you to think about the Bill of Rights. And I want you to think about improper punishments, cruel and unusual. That's literally in the 8th Amendment, cruel and unusual punishments, okay? By the way, that's why you don't get the electric chair anymore, okay? Like, they came up, if you ever seen Green Mile, okay, that was like a real deal. Like, their heads could set on fire and explode. So, like, the Supreme Court came along and was like, look, okay, we think you can kill somebody, like death penalty is okay, but using a mechanism that might like blow their head up, like we can do better than that, right? Like that seems like a cruel and unusual way to kill somebody. So now we do like lethal injections. Those are legal still in most states. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that specifically. And by the way, if you couldn't remember that, that cruel and unusual punishment came from the 8th Amendment, that's fine. Just say we have certain protections as citizens that don't allow us to be punished in ways that aren't fair. You know, we have certain rights to protect us. You can say that, but again, if you can remember specifically where it came from, I would say something like this. In the 8th Amendment, citizens of the U.S. are protected against, I put it in quotes, cruel and unusual punishments. These type of punishments for young people are a violation of that amendment. Okay. So, and again, just notice what we did is we used a specific piece of evidence. We restated it to show we understood what they said. And by the way, guys, like some of that stuff I'm reading to you, I get it. And especially if you have like your phone and you can't read it with me, it can be really hard to understand because it's written in the 1800s. But read through it, make sure that you can sum it up, you can explain it. And that's what you want to do when you first start the paragraph. And then you want to make sure that you give some kind of analysis of, okay, so here's why I think that agrees or disagrees with it in its purpose, point of view, intended audience, or historical context. That's why I always say those things at you, because you can use any of those 4 things to make your point. So what I did was I used the purpose here of what they were doing was to punish people in a really harsh way. So I think that statement, that document actually shows you that they supported democratic values by pushing back on that. Okay, and like I said, it's interesting because we still have prison reform today, and so this is an issue that we're still talking about here moving forward. All right, guys, how are we doing? Feel okay? Any questions for me as we're going down through these DBQs together? I've sent you guys on the email. You know, I always give you like an agenda, but I know this is dry how I'm taking you through this stuff. But again, I want to show you kind of in a really specific way how to do these type of essays so that regardless of whether you're taking the test or not this year, I'll just tell you guys, it is beneficial to really think through how to write an essay because, you know, no matter what you do in life, you're going to be asked to write things down. You're going to be asked to summarize things. In college, they're going to have you do that. In your master's programs, they're going to have you do that. They're going to have you read something and you're going to have an argument, a point of view. So anytime you can kind of do this and utilize evidence, but then you've got to have your own take on that evidence, okay? And I just want to make sure that you guys kind of see, it's really easy to piece together an essay if you kind of use these steps that I'm showing you. And the reason I like to kind of show you it in a really formulaic way is so that you guys don't worry about how to plug it in, like worry about your argument, worry about how you're going to articulate it, worry about finding good evidence, but don't worry about like, well, what should my thesis statement look like? Just use that formula and plug it in and spend your time instead worrying about, hey, is this what I want to use for evidence? Is this the right argument to make? I just think especially when we're talking about timed essays, that's a good way to go about it. Well, if there's no other questions, Ms. Hunt, did you have any thing that you wanted to share with them or any other feedback that you wanted to give before we get off the